and neighbors within communities across our nation. This same health pandemic has taken too many lives, created anxiety, sadness, and fear, while exposing the unwillingness of some to care for our collective humanity. Our nation's capital is under attack as we anticipate new leadership amidst the threat of hate, violence, and more loss of life. Racial injustice continues to fill our cities while unarmed Black and Brown people continue to be killed in racist encounters. When you hear or witness this reality, how does it make you feel? Think about if you notice a tightness in your swallow, the pace of your heartbeat, the shift of your body, nervous movements of your hands or feet, and a tenseness in your face muscles. Our children are also experiencing these feelings as a result of this turmoil. So in spite of our efforts to keep them safe and happy, and sometimes in neighborhood or community bubbles, we have to talk. Today, like every nation and every day in our nation, our future hope rests on our capacity to act and to speak. We cannot passively let others do the work. As professor and political activist Angela Davis said, and I quote, "If we do not know how to successfully and meaningfully talk about racism, our actions will move into misleading directions." End of quote. In my personal life, I am a mother to two young adult sons. In my professional life, I am a racial justice educator who, as you heard, has also worked in the higher education, diversity, and inclusion field. It is this intersection of those two experiences that I form my remarks to you today for this talk entitled, How to Talk to Children About Race. I hope to inspire you through stories of my own experience, reflections that have been important to my work, and my witness to the stories of others like you. My challenge to you is one that I give in every workshop that I lead. Do something and say something every day that advances racial justice. And before I explain that, let me tell you a story. It was 1996 here in Pittsburgh. My youngest son and I were sitting in a Catholic church pew. He was 3 years old and very curious. "Mom," he whispered loudly, "do you think anybody notices we are the only brown people in here?" I raised my index finger to my lips and lowered my face close to his brown cheeks and whispered softly, "Shh, not so loud in church. Yes, honey, I am sure they notice." As a young mother, I, like many of you, was caught unprepared to have conversation about race with a 3-year-old, and I failed in my short response. After we left church, I should have encouraged and engaged him in a deeper conversation by asking him to tell me more about what he noticed, how he felt, and what he thought. My unintentional message to him may have been not to ask questions about skin color. I missed the opportunity to build a dialogue about race, ignoring the fact that my 3-year-old had already noticed race-based differences. Karen Park, a professor at Antioch University in Seattle, focuses her research on children's understanding of race and ethnicity. She says, and I quote, "Children as young as 3 years old are aware of race and skin color, and they aren't afraid to ask questions. Their identities really matter to them, and racial identity is a significant part of their total identity. They also understand the power in talking about race and racism, and that when they bring those things up, they can get the attention of grown-ups and other children. Underestimating their ability to comprehend issues around race and injustice would be a mistake." End of quote. So I'm going to focus my talk with you today on three, what I hope are easy to remember themes for how to talk to children about race. The first theme, number one, is lean in. Do something or say something every day, but lean in. Number two is learn something new every day. And number three is lean out. Do something or say something every day as you lean out. So let's start with number one, lean in. Lean in to your children when they ask you questions or seem curious or interested in understanding the differences in skin color, in hairstyles, hair texture, and language. You can be the spark that keeps them interested, engaged, and confident in their words and their actions as they grow. Do not miss the moment like I did. In our YW racial justice workshops, we discuss a model introduced by social justice professor Bobby Harrow called the cycle of socialization. The beginning of that cycle, as you might imagine, represents birth, the situation into which we were born. We have no control over this. We are born without bias, assumptions, or questions. However, we are either lucky to be born into a privileged situation or unlucky to be born into an underprivileged situation. And the next stage of the cycle is what we are going to talk about today. And that is children are socialized first by the people that they love and trust, parents mostly. Those people, parents, like I said, relatives, close friends, and neighbors shape a child's self-concept, self-perception, values, expectations, and even dreams. Parents are the first teachers. So of course, we need to be prepared and ready to talk to our children about race, as well as model how we positively impact racial justice as adults. Children hear what we say and pay attention to what is not said. They see our actions and notice what we don't do. Christina Olson, a University of Washington psychologist who studies social cognitive development and racial bias, said, and I quote, "When parents don't talk about race, kids may infer from this silence that race is especially important, yet highly taboo. Basically, the last thing you want them to think." End of quote. In a University of Texas study, it was reported that the children of parents who actually did talk meaningfully with them about race had better racial attitudes at the end of the study than they did at the beginning. The children whose parents glossed over the issue and didn't discuss race did not improve. My two sons are young adults now, yet I continue to live in a state of worry and fear every day. Racism touches my life directly and indirectly every day. Audre Lorde, author and civil rights activist, defines racism as an assumed superiority of one group over another based on skin color and the right to oppress, dominate, exclude, abuse, hate, and even kill. Like most parents of color, every day I wake up and hope that my sons are safe from racism. Every night I pray that they are safe from the emotional hurt and or the physical harm of racism. I need you. We need you. That is why my challenge to you is to do something and say something every day to advance racial justice. Be intentional and confident about your capacity to talk to your children about race. So I'm going to give you some ideas for this first theme of leaning in. Read diverse books to your children. I was leading a workshop the other day. There was a woman who was in the workshop who was white, and she shared with the group that she had a mixed race child, and she didn't know how to talk about race to her child. And I asked her, does her child have books of children who look like him in the pictures? And she said no. And so we talked again later, and I offered to send her some resources. And these are things that I had because I did read to my children. And so I was able to share that with her. But think about, what are the books on your child's bookshelf in their room? What are the books in your child's classroom? Make sure that there are books and there are visual pictures and representations of people, of characters, of children who have skin color that is different than your child. Expose them to and learn other languages. A little thing I'll share about that is I did get exposed to other languages when I was in school, grade school, all the way through college. It's also important to make sure you have opportunities to speak that language with fluent speakers. And I didn't have that opportunity. So think about that as something you can do with your children. And also, I mentioned this earlier, don't miss the moment. Now, sometimes you may not know what to do or know what to say or have an answer. So get back to that. You take a pause, learn yourself, and then come back to that issue with your child. Be honest. You are not going to have all the answers. Accept that you will not have all the answers, but continue to be honest. It's okay to say, I don't know that, but let me check out. Let me look it up. Let me figure it out, and we'll talk about it again. Respect their feelings. Make sure you spare judgment on what they say and what they do. And it's really important for adults to listen more. When I worked at the mentoring partnership, part of our training for mentors was to listen more. And I can tell you, as my children were younger, one of the things that they said almost all the time, and every time I was in a workshop where we talked about listening, I remember vividly the words of my sons. Mom, you don't listen. So I think as adults, we have to think about how we are listening more so you don't hear those words from your children. Make sure you attend cultural festivals with your children, dance in different ways, learn and enjoy different music. Pay attention and notice what your children say and what they do. Again, expect to make mistakes, but don't give up. This is a long journey that we're on together. And as I said earlier, I need you. We all need you. So pick up your mistakes, learn from them, and come back in. Expose your children to new friend possibilities. One way to do that is at those festivals, or even joining cultural organizations where you and your children can meet families who are different and have the potential for new friend possibilities that are different from your neighborhood. And then another one that I thought about is, I've been doing some work with Chatham's Office of Sustainability. Drive through neighborhoods, talk about the environment, talk about why there's trees next to some houses and not trees next to others. Talk about the air that we breathe and how trees are important for that air. Talk about traffic patterns, trains that pass through, pollution, and then think about ways, both small and large, where you and your children can take action to make sure that all children have good air to breathe and have homes that are safe from detriments from traffic. There are lots of resources out there around how to talk to your children about race. And two that I'll share with you are tolerance.org. That's a great website. It's specifically geared toward teachers, but again, you are your child's first teacher, so there's lots of good information that you can use. I have been enjoyed and affiliated with tolerance.org in my entire career. I love their resources. They are very, very well done, research-based, and definitely best practices. Another one that you could consider too, it's called embracerace.org, and that's one word, EMBRACE. Embracerace.org, RACE. And there's lots of national organizations that are focused on children. As parents, you can access many of those national organizations that are specifically geared toward teachers, but again, you might find some resources there. And finally, when I talked about neighborhoods, there's a great TED Talk, and I encourage you to look up some TED Talks. There's many that are, brief, under 20 minutes that you could really learn something from. But there's a TED Talk by Amy Hunter, and it's called Lucky Zip Code. I think it's 16 or 17 minutes long. And it's a great way, again, for you to think about neighborhoods and how meaningful where people are born and raised and grow up adds to the trajectory of their life experience. So let's move on to theme number 2, learn something new every day. This is one of my favorites. In our racial justice workshops, we talk about the historical trajectory of race in America because it's important for us to realize and recognize the foundation of racism and how it is maintained in our society even today. I remember when I was in school and sitting in a classroom and there was a phrase, slaves were brought to America. And I remember feeling tense and nervous, and I was in a predominantly white classroom, so I felt like everybody was looking at me. So that was from my early history education. But then as an adult, I learned and am very aware that slave is not a social identity. And it skews the reality that I understand differently now, which is humans were kidnapped, trafficked, and forced into a system of slavery. Humans were kidnapped, trafficked, and forced into a system of slavery. As teachers of your children about race, you have to be intentional about interrupting those subtle or not so subtle patterns of language, pointing out that much of what is taught in our educational systems is taught from a white perspective. Think about the textbook authors. Think about the teachers in the classrooms. There are often gaps in the full story of our American history. So some ideas for this theme around you as your child's teacher learning. You need to build your repertoire, right? So if you think about teachers and nurses, they study a lot before they get in front of a classroom or get into a hospital room. You have to study a lot. Educate yourself. Read books. Watch educational TED Talks. Attend lectures. There's lots of ways for you to learn that meet your own personal learning curve. And also how you like to learn. Maybe you're a visual person. Maybe you love to sit down with a long book and read. Maybe you like short articles. That's all out there. Be intentional. Maybe you can get a mentor or a coach, someone who you trust and who can talk you through some situations that you might be concerned about. There's also a group that I know has done some good work in central Pennsylvania called SURGE. It's an organization that was started by a group of white adults, and it's the acronym is SURJ, standing up for racial justice. And I believe that there's a chapter in the area, but again, it is predominantly geared toward white adults in their understanding and providing more resources for each other. Read magazines, journals, books from and about people of color. Now, one of the things that I know when I do racial justice workshops with my colleague who is white, we often have a predominantly white audience in those workshops. And so I am speaking with the understanding that there is probably a predominantly white audience in our attendance here today. Expect to get overwhelmed as Black and brown people who have been in this work all of our lives, and the historic trajectory continues. Sometimes we are overwhelmed at the amount and the capacity of work that's out there to create an unracist world for our children. But we can't give up, and we ask you not to give up. There are some experts on race that I have studied, and I'll give you some of their names. Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. She wrote a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race? Really long title, great work. She's written quite a few books on race, and she has, that has been the body of research that she has done. Lawyer Kimberly Crenshaw has done some work most recently on what's happening to Black and brown girls, mostly teenagers in our schools. And so as you think about the schools that your children are attending, There's a lot of inequities that brown and Black children are facing, and so you want to be aware of those. And then the last one that I'll mention is Dr. Camera Phyllis Jones. She's a medical doctor, and she has done a lot of work on how there are gaps in the medical system, and they are race-based. So we are going to move to theme number 3, lean out. Leaning out is about how you can continue to be a role model. In our racial justice workshops, we talk about sphere of influence. That's S-P-H-E-R-E, sphere of influence. In that sphere, we have the capacity to directly impact and influence our immediate circle. So we're in the center of that sphere. There's a circle around us, and that's those things, those people who are close to us, our immediate circle, family and close friends. And then the next circle around that sphere is our indirect impact and influence on the outer circle. So when we speak or act in the presence of not so close associates or even strangers, we still have an impact. So the important part of this theme is that you have to be in sync with who you are as a person and your own social identity and your own learning style and your own capacity for being in places and spaces that are filled with people or that are quiet. If you are an outgoing person like myself, who is comfortable talking about race, you may choose to participate in a march or a rally or speak at a local council meeting. If you are more introverted or feel less comfortable, you may choose to write letters to your local representatives about an issue, or maybe purchase some culturally relevant books for your child's classroom. When you lean out, think creatively about what you can do or say that makes an impact outside of your home, but you have to follow your own conscience and focus on your personal strengths. In the indirect sphere of influence, maybe you would ask someone else to address your concerns at a council meeting, but just by the fact that you asked someone and that you shared your concerns, you are doing something and you are making a difference. Your children see you and watch what you do, and they expect it to match what you say. So when you talk about eliminating racism, when you talk about racial justice, make sure that you have actions that follow what your words are. When they see you leaning out in ways that connect with your strengths and your personality, that will help them to internalize their own strengths, find their own voice, and conceptualize how they engage. So some ideas for number 3 in leaning out: check out your city, enjoy playgrounds or parks in places where children are different than your children, where neighborhoods that have clusters of different cultures, where your children, again, have an opportunity to meet people, meet children who are different than yours, who speak another language. Travel, after we get out of COVID-19, obviously, is also another thing to think about. Travel to other communities, to other states, and maybe even abroad. Check out cultural activities and events in your city. I want to share a story about traveling with you. When I worked at the university, we would take students on service trips, and I was always amazed at how much students who lived in Pennsylvania never left Pennsylvania. And the faces and expressions and the joy that they found in being in another place and learning about another culture through immersion is really, really important. And so think about that with your children. Read magazines, journals, and books from and about authors of color. We have access to the internet. You can find anything you want by Googling it. My husband jokes at me because I just Google everything. But there are lots of children's magazines and journals that have a different perspective than your children, their cultural backgrounds. And so think about engaging them with those. Join cultural organizations to broaden your circle of friends. As I've been in Pittsburgh most of my adult life, I have been involved with the Turkish Cultural Association and learned more about the Turkish culture. I have been involved with the Latin American Cultural Union and learned more about our Latino and Spanish speaking friends and neighbors in our community here in Pittsburgh, that is important. And you can never underestimate how much your children can learn, and also how you can broaden your circle of friends through that experience. Advocate in places where you have a voice, and teach your child the importance of being an advocate and being an ally. Children are very, very conscientious about what happens to their peers in their classrooms. And if you give them the permission and the experience and knowledge about how they can use their voice to help someone else, and how they can act to help someone else, then they too will see opportunities in their classroom to be an ally for the child sitting next to them at the desk, or the child who's being bullied in the classroom, or the child who's being called racial names. And speaking of racial names, another thing that I want to mention in the part for you, the adult, to learn more that I forgot, was to learn terminology. And I say that, and again, lots of resources out there, but it's important for you to know the terminology. Most specifically, brown and Black people are not all the same. People who speak different languages are not all the same. If you speak Spanish, your Spanish could come from South America. It could come from Mexico. It could come from Puerto Rico. It could come from Spain. People are not monoliths. So it's important for you to understand terminology and not label people. People should tell you how they want to be called. You know, we have the census, and the census asks us to check off boxes, and oftentimes we fall into the trap of labeling people based on census labels. We don't want to do that. And so that's an important thing, again, for you to learn about, so that you can help your child understand that. So when they come home from school, they don't say, they don't use wrong language, wrong labels to speak of individuals that they meet. And also, there are many people who have moved to America, and in their home countries, they're not labeled. So there's a lot of things to really learn about the whole concept of terminology and labeling. So in closing, I want to make sure that I remind you of the challenge. Do something and say something every day. And then think about the three themes. Lean in to your child, learn, and learn more, and then lean out with your child. Thank you for allowing me to share my insights, and I welcome questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We've had a nice steady stream of questions coming in. So just as a reminder, please place your questions in the chat and we will get through as many of them as we can. The first question is that conversations about race and racism can be very difficult. Could you share a particularly challenging conversation that you've had with your boys? What prompted that conversation and what was the outcome?
Oh, that's a good one. So I would say, first of all, that I don't know how my sons would feel about this. They are grown now and they're not in the house, but I would say probably they witnessed me being more protective about race than those types of conversations that you mentioned. But I did talk with them a lot about making sure that that they keep themselves in safe spaces, and that they don't put themselves in situations where their safety can be compromised. So, and a lot of the experiences that I've had with my kids have been reversed. So I'll give you an example. One of my children was at an event with a friend who was white, and his friend got in trouble. My son did not get in trouble. The police were involved, and the situation immediately reversed to my son, because my son was trying to protect his friend. So you know, we listen to the story, and there's, as parents, I'm not going to say don't stick up for your friends, don't be an ally for your friends because they're white. That was important to him. And so there were many times where we've had to be listening parents, and we've had to talk through the situation, but not give advice that would seem like obvious advice to give, like don't get yourself in trouble because you're the Black person, when they're doing something that's right. Now, if they were doing something that was wrong, we would have to have that conversation. But that's one instance that I can remember where, you know, my son felt it was important to protect his friend. I'm trying to think if I have another situation. You know, my kids are in their late 20s now, so it's hard to think back and remember like things we talked about. I do remember in an instance when my one of my sons was in, my son was in, I think he was in first or second grade, and he came into the car and he said that the teacher told him he said a bad word. And so I said, what do you mean? And he said, he started crying because he said, I'm in trouble and I don't want to be in trouble. And so, you know, he was crying. And so I let him cry. We drove home from school. We got to the house and I asked him more about it. And so he got accused of saying a swear word, which my husband and I don't say swear words. He was probably in kindergarten, and he wasn't exposed to bad language. And so as it turned out, the word was funky. And the teacher, some child tattled on him and gave another word. So it was a big situation where, again, oftentimes, especially in a world where children are targeted as bad before they even get a chance to, you know, protect themselves or defend themselves. And so my son was labeled as, you know, someone who said a bad word. The word was not bad. So I had to have a conversation with my child about how, you know, that's not a bad word and you didn't do anything wrong, and how important it is for every time something happens at school for him to feel like he can tell us the entire story. He doesn't have to cry. He doesn't have to feel bad about something. We just want him to tell the truth of what happened. And we always had his back. If he did something wrong, we definitely made sure to address that. But if we felt that he was being treated unfairly or biased, which that often comes with children of color, then we, you know, stood up for him and made sure that that he was part of a system that wasn't, again, treating him in a way that was different than other kids.
Great, thank you so much. Next question is, for parents of white children, what is an age-appropriate way to talk about the injustices the Black community has endured? This woman says, I don't know how much to share without overwhelming her children who are 4 and 5.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, I'm not an expert in this field. I just, I'm coming to you from a parent and a person who teaches racial justice as a profession to adults. But one of the things that I think is easy for parents to do is to find books that are age appropriate for your child and talk through the lessons in the book. That's one really good way to do it. So my kids are 2.5 years apart, and I can tell you that there were many times where, you know, we'd be reading a story together at I'm going to say nap time, not nap time, bedtime. And my older son would ask a question that I knew the concept wasn't, that my younger son wouldn't understand it, but I chose to answer my older son's questions. You know, because my kids were together all the time in our house, you know, when we're reading stories or when we're talking about things or watching TV. So I felt like it was important for my younger son to hear the information. And, you know, if he had more questions, he could ask. But that was a choice that I made. But again, I think that kids' books have a great opportunity for you to really talk through themes, and kids' books are all you know, designated age appropriate. And again, check out some of those websites tolerance.org and embracerace.org, and you can get some really good resources that are age appropriate to help you talk about race. And I totally understand you don't want to overwhelm your children, but be aware that they see things, they hear things that are happening in our world. So even as we think, oh, they're too young to talk about this, be open and ask them questions. You want to know what they've seen. You want to know what they've heard, and that will lead you into how to respond to them. So, again, keep in touch, keep on the pulse of what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're exposed to and witnessing, so that you can have those conversations. And probably you can be pretty assured that anything that's happening in the broader spectrum of our nation, that they're having some knowledge of that in some way. And so it's, again, important to find good child appropriate resources that are out there that can help you feel comfortable talking through some of the situations. And, when you think about injustice and violence, you can read books on kindness and read books on, faith, and read books on being a better person and love, and helping people. And this is Martin Luther King Day, a day of service. So thinking about those kinds of qualities that you would want in your child is another option for really starting to talk through some of the positives in how to deal with the racial injustice and violence that's just happening in our world, that is definitely going to be part of the sphere of the air that they breathe, or something that they caught on TV. And again, if you create an environment where your kids feel comfortable asking questions, hopefully they'll ask questions about what they see or what they witness. And part of that is you being able to ask questions. Maybe ask questions of, as adults in your house, ask your another adult in your house how they feel about something, what their thoughts are on something, and that will encourage them to use that same language. How do you feel? What are your thoughts? And I hope that can help you, but definitely there's lots of really good resources out there.
Barbara, in the chat, there are a lot of questions about specific book resources for us to children. Are they listed on some of those websites that you've been giving, or do you have any specific recommendations for good books to read?
Yes, that's a great question. I am a book lover, and I love children's books. I have so many children's books that I bought for my children, and I saved every last one of them. Again, because when my children, they're in their late 20s now, when they were growing up, it was very hard in Pittsburgh to find books that had characters and pictures of children who had brown skin like my children, and stories about brown children and families and different cultures. So I did save all those books. I am, as part of our YWCA Eliminating Racism mission, creating a book list that hopefully we can share on our website. And so please make sure, if you have my email address, whoever asked those questions, feel free to email me, but definitely watch our website, because we are going to start posting those as soon as we can. I have an intern who's working on putting short descriptions about those books on the with the titles and the authors. Tolerance.org, I know, has books that are good for kids that talk about children of color in age appropriate ways. Caldecott and Newbery award-winning books. Those are books that get honors. Also have good opportunities, but literally I started this list last week because the one person from the workshop that I was teaching had asked me related to her grandson. I'm trying to think of any jump to my head right away. So this is not for young, well, you could. One of the books that I know my children enjoyed tremendously is a book called Bud Not Buddy, and it's written by, I want to say, Christopher Curtis. It's a chapter book, but how I use that book was and then the Watsons Go to Birmingham is his other book, same author, and those are both chapter books about a brown family. And I read those books to my kids one chapter at a time. And so there was suspense in their bedtime ritual, because they would look forward to, what was going to happen next. But it's a story about a family. And so I found that was a book that they just absolutely love to this day. There's a series that's written by John Lewis that is I forget what they're called. They're like cartoon. There's a name for it, but I can't think of it right now. They're stories that are in cartoon format. And he has a whole series on his life. And obviously this civil rights movement is a part of John Lewis's story. So that's a great book that you could read to your children. And there's pictures. Graphic novel is the name of it. And so that's a series, again, that my children appreciated even as adults. Snowy Day is a book that I remember reading to my sons. It's a cute story of a mother and her son. There's pictures in there. It's a perfect story for this time of year for sure. And it's about a little boy getting dressed up to go outside and to play in the snow. The thing that I remember about reading to my children was, we stopped at every page. So it wasn't like we read the story from cover to cover. We stopped at every page. We talked about the picture. We talked about, their home, the mother in the book, what she does, the little boy, where do you think he goes to school? Who do you think his friends are? So, be animated with your children and really think about how much a book can give to your child, even if it's a storybook of 12 pages with 5 lines on each page. Children love the pictures, and my children for sure did. And so that's one book that I can remember. That was by Ezra Jack Keats. So yeah, my memory is a little faded, but I definitely am working on developing a list. Oh, and another place you can probably find some good resources. I shouldn't say probably, you absolutely can. The University of Pittsburgh has a center that's called Positive Racial Identity Development in Education, maybe. It's capital PRIDE with a period after each letter. That's the acronym. And they provide resources to teachers, and I think to parents, where you can actually take a workshop on how to learn yourself, and also how to teach children about race and teach children about positive self concept and self-identity if they are children of color. So they definitely have resources for parents and teachers, and they also will probably have book lists. And I'll also add, I know Carnegie, well, I shouldn't say Carnegie Library is where I am, but libraries probably across the United States, definitely our Carnegie Library here in Pittsburgh usually has done book lists for either Martin Luther King Day or Black History Month, or any cultural history month. They'll have a collection of books that they recommend, and another great resource, because they're librarians who know about books. So that's another resource you can check out.
Great, Barbara, thank you. This next set of questions is similar, so I'm going to ask them in a sort of combined format. The first is, how do you recommend responding to kids when they make a negative remark about racial differences? And to lead on into that, another person asked, could you please give us specific tools and advice on how to speak to friends of our children who may say something racially offensive? And should those people speak to the children directly, or should they speak to the offending youth's parents?
Okay. Let me try to remember all that. So the first part is, if your child says something negative. So again, I'm not an expert, but one of the things that whenever your child says something that you don't approve of, it's important to get some background information about where that's coming from. So I would suggest talking to your child, and again, if it's a word that you never heard, or it's a word that doesn't come out of your house that you're aware of, ask them where they heard that word. Children, my experience with my children is that they get afraid that they're in trouble. And so part of what you want to do is not get to that point of making them afraid that they're in trouble, but really getting some understanding of where that language came from. And so if you suspect it's not coming from your house, then you want to know, how did you, where did that word come from? Why are you saying that word? Do you know what that word means? This is a way to talk to adults too. Oftentimes adults say words that they think mean one thing, and that's not how they've been perceived by the person who's offended by the word. So ask them where the word comes from, ask them where they heard it, ask a lot of questions to really understand what they mean by the word. Maybe they heard the word and they said the word, and you have a different meaning of what that word is than they have. So again, get to understand your child more and where that is coming from, and then talk through when they give you the answers to the question, and make sure you follow up with good information and help them understand that words can hurt people. And so they want to be careful and focus on that word. And then, make sure that you give them an opening and an opportunity to continue to ask questions about words, and to continue to come to you when they hear these things from other people. So that's one way that I would deal with that first part of that. The second part is, I'll tell you what I would do. If a child is in my home and says a derogatory word of some sort, or specifically a racially charged word, I would talk to that child who's in my house. I would talk to that child in the same way, ask questions about where it came from. Do they know what it means? Do they understand how it hurts people? And then once I learn more about that, one of the things that I would say is, we don't use that language in this house. And I would ask them not to use that language in this house. And then I would also tell them that I am going to be talking to their parents, because I want their parent to know that I've talked to their child, not because I want them to get in trouble. And so I would definitely talk to the parents in a way, especially if I think that the child heard the word from someone else and doesn't really know what it means and doesn't know that it hurt people. I would want their parent to know that I understand that as we move forward. Now, if it's a word that they use in their house regularly, so as a Black person, I've been called the N-word. If someone called my child the N-word in my home and I talked with them about it and they said that word floats around their house all the time, that would be an opportunity for me to end that friendship. And, that child wouldn't be allowed in our house, because, we have to, there's a line in terms of what we accept and expect of our children. And I would want my child to know that, that's not behavior or language that I want them to grow up with, both as the speaker of those words or as the recipient of those words from a friend. And that would not be a true friendship if someone hurts you with their words and disrespects you with their words. So that would be how I would handle that situation. I think I got both sections of that question.
Great, thank you so much. Last question is from an educator perspective. What can educators do in the classroom to help have these kinds of conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so much. So I'll just break down some things that I think about all the time. I worked at a university. I co-taught a class with a professor who worked in the education department. And one of the things that I was very aware of is that oftentimes our education departments in colleges and universities across America, and I'm not saying this to throw them under the bus, I'm just saying it's our reality, many of those teachers often have not had any classes or training as it relates to understanding culture, understanding race more specifically. And so they come into the classrooms underprepared in that area. And so some of them who may not be parents might find it easy to just ignore all that. And they can do that. They can be in a classroom and make it through many, many years of being a teacher and not ever address that, because it's not something that was addressed with them and they don't feel comfortable in addressing it. And so they just try to, slip through. And as we know from the research that I talked about earlier, those children in their classrooms will not change if those things don't happen. And so it's important for us as adults to make sure that we understand what's happening in our child's classroom and make sure that we advocate for uh, teachers to do more than what they might know to do, or what's missing from the classroom. And so you have schools where there are more white children in the classroom. Maybe no, I've had people say to me, well, there's no Black children in our school, so we don't have to talk about that. And so this is what I call the bubble concept, where people think that if it doesn't exist in their space, then they don't have to think about it or talk about it. But your children are going to leave the bubble eventually. Eventually, they're just going to leave that bubble. They're going to leave the bubble of your home, the bubble of your neighborhood. They may go to a college. There's no college that's all white or all one race. So they're in some format, they're going to be in touch with someone who's different than them. So it is important for us to address these issues in schools. I could go on and on and on for the opportunities for teachers. Sometimes I'm amazed at the lack of their creativity, especially for school districts that don't have teachers of color. You know, there's lots of professionals in the community who would be more than happy to come into the classroom. Lots of professionals. I mean, you could bring, if you are a school district that has all white teachers, you could pretty much bring professionals of color in daily, every day, every hour, because there's lots of people available. And so use your community, make sure the teachers know that that's an option for them. Use your community, build a school that's a community school, and make sure kids are exposed to those differences. Or if you don't want to do it from that perspective, teachers have an opportunity to get a coach, get a mentor, get someone who has expertise on the topic of race to help talk you through. You can sit down with someone who has expertise and say, this is the area that I am struggling with in my classroom. This is what I want to do. How do I do it? There's lots of opportunities for teachers to learn online. Embrace Race, tolerance.org. There's lots of ways for teachers to learn about how to talk about race. You can do it by yourself, or you can do it with a cluster of your own teacher friends. And that way you have people to bounce ideas off of and talk through things. I would say that the resources are endless and people have to be more intentional. And we who have children have to make everybody who's in touch with our children, who's in spaces with our children, we have to get them to come to the plate and be intentional about their work too.
Thank you so much, Barbara. This has been a fantastic conversation. And as everyone can see, we only were able to get to a small number of the questions in the chat. So everyone on the program, please know that resources will be shared out with you. Barbara's email was included in the chat box as well. We hope that this is just the beginning of some of your conversations, and that you will lean in, you will learn something new, and you will lean out as well. And just to wrap us up here quickly, I just want to share with you that in a 1963 collection of sermons by Martin Luther King Jr., called Three Dimensions of a Complete Life, Dr. King proclaimed, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are we doing for others? What are we doing for others? And that question is so urgent now, perhaps more important than ever. And here is the good news. You're doing it. Everyone who's participated today and being a part of these discussions and taking time off of what is a day off of work or school, you've chosen to engage in this conversation, and we really appreciate that and hope that you'll carry the conversation forward today, tomorrow, and going onward from here. Thank you so much for being a part of United Way's Martin Luther King Volunteer Day. We hope that you found it a thought-provoking and inspirational discussion, and that you will be on the lookout for other United Way programs that we'll be doing virtually and hopefully sometime in 2021 in person again. So thank you again to Barbara Johnson and the YWCA of Greater Pittsburgh, and on behalf of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania, I wish you and your family a wonderful MLK Day, and thank you for joining us.